Greetings, fellow ghouls, and thanks for stopping by on this stormy evening. Yes, I'm still out behind Aberfoyle Manor, hiding in the gazebo. And Dr. Wolfula should be getting back to me any day now with a plan for how to kill that shadow demon. But until then, I'll just keep waiting here, I guess. You know, it actually has been kind of nice to be out here in the fresh air, amongst the greenery and the water. Something kind of cozy about it. Wouldn't you agree? Say, why don't I read you another true scary story from my collection of twisted tales? Yes, come, take a seat, and I'll tell you the tale of the Haunted Hotel. When I was in the 7th grade, I received a small tape recorder as part of my Spanish class. Okay, so that's not the best start to a scary story, but just bear with me. It was mid-March of 2006, and it was the last Friday before spring break began. I was sitting in Spanish, my last class of the day, when my teacher announced a special homework assignment to be completed over break. She went around the room, distributing these old, handheld microcassette recorders, one per person. Along with the recorders, she handed out a sheet of paper with a series of questions in Spanish. Instead of just writing our answers down, like normal homework, we were tasked with recording our answers to practice our speaking and accents. The moment she handed me the tape recorder, though, I instantly thought of another way which I could use it. At the time, I was completely obsessed with ghost hunting TV shows. Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, and Scariest Places on Earth were my 3 favorites, though I also watched Fact or Faked, Paranormal Files, and Destination Truth. I couldn't even begin to guess how many hours of grainy night vision footage I consumed across my adolescent years. Critics and my skeptical friends used to always say, "What's the point? They never find anything on those shows," but that's incorrect. There were numerous unexplainable apparitions, thermal heat signatures, and EVPs. For those of you who might not know about EVPs, it stands for Electronic Voice Phenomena. Paranormal investigators would ask questions of the spirits while recording sound. Later, they'd listen back to the recording, and sometimes they'd get a response, a voice they hadn't heard at the time, attempting to communicate from beyond the grave. I remember one episode of Ghost Hunters specifically where the gang was in an old haunted hotel somewhere. They did an EVP session in one of the rooms and seemed to make contact with a spirit. The ghost hunters asked if there was anyone in there with them, and the spirit seemed to reply, "Of course I'm in here. It's my room." Sitting there in Spanish class with a tape recorder that had practically fallen right into my lap, I suddenly knew exactly what I would be doing over spring break, conducting my own paranormal investigation. The only problem was, I didn't really have anywhere to investigate. I started off sitting in the basement of my own family's house, turning off all the lights and asking questions of any hypothetical spirits that might be around. Unfortunately, my own house wasn't really scary at all, even in the dark. That first night of spring break, I sat there for at least an hour or 2, practically begging the spirits to communicate, but the vibe just wasn't right. I plugged in some headphones and listened back to my session on the tape recorder, and yet, as hard as I tried, I couldn't make out any messages from beyond. Then, the next day, my luck turned around. I was eating breakfast when my parents revealed that they had actually been putting together a trip for spring break. We would be going to visit some relatives who lived on Block Island in Rhode Island. They lived in a small house at the center of the island, a modest home that didn't have much extra room for my parents and I to stay. As such, we would be staying at the Spring House Hotel, an old hotel on the eastern side of the island, right on the water. An old hotel Immediately after my parents told me where I'd be staying, I went on the computer and researched the location. As soon as I saw a picture of it, I got the chills. It was a huge white building on a hill overlooking the ocean, built in 1852. It looked spooky enough already in broad daylight, so I was practically salivating imagining it at night. If ever there was a perfect spot to communicate with the spirits, this had to be it. We drove down a day or two later. I packed my bag with plenty of clothes and a bathing suit and all that, but was especially sure to bring my new tape recorder with extra batteries. My parents and I left that morning, and I sat in the back seat listening to music. Though it had been perfectly nice weather earlier in the day, as we got closer to our destination, an impenetrable wall of gray clouds began to encroach upon the horizon. Soon a steady rain began to fall, and I leaned my head on the car window, watching the droplets intertwine as they streamed down the glass, and the steady rhythm of the rain eventually put me to sleep. I woke up to the sound of car doors opening. We had reached our destination, or rather, the last leg of our journey. See, Block Island, being an actual island and all, was only accessible by ferry. I looked out the window to see my dad going to get tickets as we waited in line to board. It was still raining outside. In fact, it was raining even harder. My dad ran back to the car and, with our new tickets, drove onto the large ferry, parking it below with the other cars. We got out and went upstairs, where there was an indoor area with a cafe and the main deck. It appeared to be a seaworthy vessel, though it did look like it had seen better days. There was plenty of rust, both inside and out, and it seemed like the ferry was close to capacity, as there was a slightly uncomfortable number of people walking around. Normally, passengers would be out on the main deck enjoying the sunlight and spreading out, but thanks to the rain, which was steadily increasing in intensity, everyone was packed inside the main area, like sardines in a tin can. It only got worse from there. Soon after we started moving and reached the open ocean, the boat really began rocking, rising and falling with the rough seas. The weather remained horrible for the rest of the ferry ride, bouncing us up and down for a solid 45 minutes. Many, including my own parents, ended up getting seasick, tripping over themselves to get to one of the 2 tiny bathroom stalls in time. Instead of being stuck in a room with a few dozen vomiting strangers, though, I chose to go outside onto the deck. I got completely soaked, but the fresh air and keeping my eye on the horizon kept me from feeling too nauseous. Plus, it gave me my first look at the hotel as we arrived. Through the overcast fog of the stormy seas, I saw it. Sitting there next to the water, it was everything I'd hoped it would be. It was old, with rows of tall windows looking out onto the ocean. Its bright red roof pierced through the cool gray mist. The architecture had this unmistakably antiquated feeling. The building looked like it belonged in one of those sepia-toned photographs you see in horror movies. I had been so excited to do my EVP session, but now seeing it in person, passing by as the ferry made its way to the harbor, some fear began to accompany the excitement. The ferry docked in the harbor, and the passengers made their way off it as quickly as possible, eager to step on solid ground once again. The rain very considerably weakened to a slight drizzle as we drove through town and made our way to the hotel, my parents still looking a little green from their time in the open ocean. We passed by a number of old buildings, tiny shops and stores that looked straight out of a history book with their old shingle siding. None of them could compare to the hotel, though. We reached the spring house in a matter of minutes, grabbed our bags, and went inside to check in. The hotel lobby was exactly as I'd hoped, straight out of an episode of Ghost Hunters. There was an old dark wooden staircase to the right, with a desk a bit further back. As my parents got the room key, I wandered around the lobby. The place didn't just look haunted, it felt haunted too. The sounds of the floor creaking, the smell of the dusty curtains. It was all so perfect. I followed my parents upstairs, where we made our way to our room and settled down for a bit of a nap. We were going to meet our relatives for dinner at a restaurant in town, but we had enough time to squeeze in some shut-eye and recharge after the draining experience at sea. It did feel a bit like the ocean had chewed us up and spat us back out. Our room fit right in with the rest of the aesthetic, with its vintage floral wallpaper and antique furniture. I fell asleep on my bed, listening to the rain tapping on the window as I looked out onto the ocean. All through dinner, I couldn't wait to begin my investigation. I half-heartedly answered my relatives' questions about school and whatever else they asked me about, but my focus was back at the top of the hill at the hotel. After we returned from dinner, my parents, worn out from the day, fell asleep pretty quickly. It was pretty late after all, maybe around 10:30 or 11 p.m. Normally, they might have had a thing or two to say about me wandering around the hotel at night, but they were too tired to put up much of a fight. I promised them that I would be careful, grabbed my tape recorder and a small flashlight I brought from home, and set off into the night. Immediately outside our door was the long hallway of the second floor. Scary as it was, it didn't seem like an optimal place to start asking questions of the spirits, as I'd run the risk of waking up the other sleeping patrons in the process. Also, if anyone else was awake, their talking and their televisions would contaminate my audio recording. No good. I made my way to the large staircase and downstairs into the main lobby. The staircase was so old that it creaked even through the carpet as I carefully stepped down, turning around to see the front desk completely vacant. In fact, the whole first floor seemed completely vacant, of any living guests at least. To the left of the foyer was a large sitting room. One dim lamp was on in the corner, and a collection of different chairs was arranged around a stone fireplace. I looked around the room, wondering if I'd finally found my perfect location, and then I practically jumped out of my skin. My heart skipped a beat as I noticed a mirror next to the fireplace and caught my own movement reflected in the aged surface. Come on, I thought, pull yourself together. What would the ghost hunters do? I went over to the lamp in the corner and switched it off. They usually sat in complete darkness during their sessions, after all. I went back to the chairs by the fireplace, sat in the most comfortable-looking one, and started recording. Hello? Is there anyone here who'd like to speak with me? I asked the question into the crushing darkness, but was only met with silence. I could faintly hear the ocean waves outside, but that was it. I looked down at my recorder, the little red light glowing above the record button. What is your name? I followed up, trying my best to remember all of the key questions I'd seen paranormal investigators asking on TV. Once again, no response. I took a deep breath. This next one was a doozy. A bit scarier to ask. If there's anyone here, can you please give me a sign of your presence? The faint waves outside sounded like a sigh, and I realized in that moment that I was holding my breath. Again, only silence within the sitting room. I turned on my flashlight and directed it down in front of me, where there was an antique chest being used as a coffee table by the fireplace. There were a few magazines on it, and also a small teacup on a saucer that someone had left out. Give me a sign. Let me know that you're here. Can you move that teacup? I pointed to the small cup on the table, wondering if the spirits could see me, or hear me for that matter. I watched the cup, my eyes as wide as its saucer, as the illuminated dust wove through the beam of my flashlight. Creak? Just then, a loud creak from across the room. I stood up in place instantaneously, my flashlight drawn to the direction of the noise like a magnet. Hello? I asked. The creak had come from the other side of the room, where there was a door leading somewhere else. I picked up my tape recorder, made sure it was still rolling, and walked over to the door. My heart now racing, I slowly pushed it open. The beam of my flashlight lit up a large dining room. Dozens of windows lined the perimeter, looking out onto the hotel's porch and the ocean beyond. There were maybe a dozen or so dining tables with white tablecloths, all their chairs tucked in tidily, and their place settings prepared for the next morning. As I scanned the dining room with my flashlight, I noticed something odd. One of the chairs was turned slightly sideways. I only noticed it because the rest of them were rather immaculately placed, but this one was off. "Is that you, spirit?" I questioned into the room. Once again, nothing. I eyed the wonky chair one last time and retreated back into the sitting room. I wasn't scared of the dining room per se, but it just seemed more fitting to continue my session in a smaller environment, where it'd be easier to hear any anomalous sounds. I asked a few more questions and was probably down there in that room for another hour, just sitting and recording. Eventually, I ran out of room on the tape and decided to call it a night. I gathered my recorder, turned the lamp back on, and went to head back up to the room. I exited the sitting area and walked back over to the staircase near the front desk. I swear, on whatever deity you like, that this next part is true. About halfway up the stairs, suddenly behind me, I heard a laugh. It wasn't a small, childlike giggle like you sometimes hear in the horror movies. No, it was a deep, loud laugh. Short, but there. It sounded like this. I spun around instantly, the laugh sounding so close and real that I expected to find a person behind me pranking me. But there was no one. No one on the stairs, no one in the foyer or the lobby area. It sounded so real. I wasn't even really scared at first. I figured it was just someone actually there. But there was no one. The reality of what had just happened slowly set in. I had just heard a ghost. I turned and ran up the rest of the stairs, giving one final look back down as I reached the top. The spirit had laughed at me. Were they laughing at my silly attempts to communicate with them? Had they been listening the whole time as I sat there in the dark, just waiting until I stopped rolling to scare me out of my wits? My mind moved almost as fast as my feet as I ran the rest of the way back to the room and jumped in bed. The next day I plugged in my headphones and listened to the tape. I had caught the creak in the dining room, but apart from that, I couldn't hear any messages from beyond. My parents didn't seem to believe me about the laughing ghost and probably thought I just scared myself somehow. We enjoyed the rest of our trip to the island, and I did one more EVP session before we left. Once again, I didn't catch anything. Overall, however, I was satisfied. My goal had been to communicate with the spirits, and in the end, it was more like them communicating with me. Another good one. I know some people don't take spirits seriously, but trust me, they're no laughing matter. Have you ever heard a ghostly voice? Let me know down in the comments if you ever feel like you've communicated with a spirit from beyond. Well, apart from me, of course. Oh. Now, while it has been nice to have some company here in the gazebo, I do suggest you get going. If you don't get out of here before nightfall, I'm not sure you ever will. Just stick to the path and you'll see the main road. And do come back and see me again sometime, and I'll have another twisted tale of terror waiting for you. Good night.